guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Rainbow Bright and today we are totally 80s, baby.
Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Kyra and today I'm bringing to you 4 looks, 1 palette, and my review on the Norvina Collection Volume 2. There are 18 mattes and 7 shimmers in this palette. I do think a couple of the shimmers do come off as duochromes, specifically this shade, and this shade. So let's go ahead and get into the 4 looks. This is look number 4. I did have one look that was a fail, and I'll put the picture of that up right here. Right? Yes, here. And, you know, it just wasn't my favorite look. I did kind of redo it a little bit in look number 3, so you'll see that once you get there, and I will join you at the end for my final thoughts on the palette.
Starting off with the shade E4, which is called a matte red brown. I didn't really see the red in this shade, but either way, I'm just blowing this out in my transition area and then gradually building it up until I have it just the way that I like it. And then I'm also going to blend this out on the lower lash line. Next, going into E5, which is a matte black. I'm first taking a very dense brush and placing this on the outer V of the lid and building it up just a little bit before I go in with the first brush and work on blending that out into the crease. And I'm going to repeat this a couple of times, starting with placing the black on the lid and then going back in with that original brush and blending it out again into the crease. Next, I'm taking my jumbo eye pencil from NYX in the shade Milk, and I'm applying that all over the inner 2/3 of the lid, and then blending that out with a very flat synthetic brush. And this is just so the next shade will really pop on the lid. Going into B1, which is described as a matte green with large sparkle. The sparkle does not translate on the eye, but even still, the green needs to be built up quite a bit, so I did spend some time doing this, and I'm trying to keep this to the middle third of the lid, getting ready to add a shimmer on the inner third, and that shimmer is A3, which is called a Shimmer Lime, and in the pan, it looked quite a bit more yellow, and I think it starts to look yellow on the eye until it's layered over that green. Then going back to the matte black E5, I'm just reestablishing that depth in the outer corner of the eye, as well as running a little bit on the lower lash line on the outer half. And then going back to our first shade, the matte red brown, I am just using this to buff out that black on the lower lash line. And then going into C1, which is a multi-shade shimmer champagne. Say that 3 times fast. And I'm just placing that on the inner corner. And here is the final look. I really love how this look came out, but then again, I'm a sucker for green eyeshadow, and I finished off the look with the Maybelline Superstay Ink Crayon in the shade Accept a Dare. I hope you guys enjoyed this look, and let's go ahead and get into the next one. First, going into the shade D4, which is a matte yellow with large sparkle. I'm going to first place this into my crease using a very dense small brush, just patting that in, pressing it into the skin before I go back in and blend this out. And then I go in with a clean fluffy brush to further diffuse the edges. Going into C4, which is a matte Prussian blue, I'm using another small dense brush to place this on the outer third of the lid and just really build that up to full opacity. Then I go into D5, which is a matte navy blue, and I'm using an even smaller, dense brush to put this on the very outer corner of the lid, just to add a little depth to the look and add a barrier between the Prussian blue and the yellow. And then I'm going to go into the previous brush just to shape this outer corner a little bit better and make sure there are no harsh edges. Then going back to C4, which is that Prussian blue, the previous shade, and I'm again using this to blend with the navy, further round and shape that outer V. And then going into A4, which is a shimmer periwinkle shade. I absolutely loved this shimmer shade, and it is very unique to my collection. And I'm just building this up until I like it. Then going into C1, which is a multi-shade reflective shimmer champagne, and I'm adding this to the inner third of the lid, pulling that up into the crease as I like to do, which adds a little lift to the eye. And then I'm also adding the same shade on the inner corner. Then I go back into our matte navy blue, and I'm putting this on the lower lash line on the outer half. And then going back into C4, which is that matte Prussian blue, I'm using this on the inner half of the lower lash line, and then going in with a clean smudger brush. I'm just blending that out. And here is the final look. I really love how this turned out. It did take 2 tries for me to get it right. And I did finish off the look with the Bobbi Brown Crushed Liquid Lip in the shade Give a Fig. Starting off with C5, which is a matte oxblood. Here we go with the oxblood name again. And I'm just placing this on the outer V of the eye, building it up to as much opacity as I'm looking for, and then going straight into D2, which is a matte bold orange. This is definitely a stunning orange. It's almost a little bit coral leaning, and I'm just building this up around that burgundy shade, pressing it into the crease before I go in and do any blending. And this way I make sure I get every bit of that bold orangey goodness. And I think these 2 shades look absolutely stunning together. Next, going into D3, which is a matte hot pink, and I'm putting this right next to the burgundy shade on the lid, so about the middle part of the lid, if you will. Again, just building this up so that it stands out against the previous shade. Then going into E2, which is called a Shimmering Amethyst shade. This is definitely a duochrome, and I think it looks more taupe with a pink sparkle, but either way, it's absolutely stunning, especially layered over that hot pink. Then going back to D2, which is our matte bold orange, just really diffusing this and blowing this out on the lower lash line. And get ready for some weirdness. And here is the final look. Definitely my favorite look of the 4, but which is your favorite? Finished off the look with the Clinique Almost Lipstick in Black Honey, and here's the look in natural lighting. Hi guys, starting off with C3, which is a matte cobalt blue. I'm just building this up in the outer V of the lid and gradually building it up as I go, pressing it into the skin and then buffing it slightly to blend it out. And then we go into C2, which is a matte sky blue with sparkle. And I'm pressing this over in my crease area, over that cobalt blue, and just gradually building that up in my crease. excuse me, rivet. And I'm just doing this gradually before I do any blending. And then taking the shade B5, which is a matte azure blue, and this is just ever so slightly lighter and brighter than the previous shade, so I'm just using this to add a little brighter pop of blue to the crease and transition area. And then I used the previous brush to go ahead and blend it out and make sure we have no harsh edges. Then I go back to the shade C3, which was our first shade, and just build up the outer V and the outer corner of the eye, making sure we have full opacity. And again, taking that previous brush to blend it all together. Then going into the shade A1, no, not the steak sauce, but a shimmering hot pink, and I'm placing this all over the inner 2/3 of the eye. This shade did take some definite building up, and I felt that it did lay down better on the lid overall with the good old phalange, or my God-given blenders. Then going into B2, which is a matte deep periwinkle blue, and I'm just putting that in between our first shade on the outer V and the pink for a blend. And then back to C3, which is our matte cobalt blue. I'm placing this on the lower lash line, and then also going back to B2, which is a matte deep periwinkle blue, and also putting that on the lower lash line. Then going into the matte lime yellow A2, putting that on the inner corner, didn't really love it, so I went in with A3, which is a shimmering lime, and placed that there. Get ready for some weirdness. Just kidding. Here's the final look. I do like how this turned out, and I finished this off with the Maybelline HD Vinyl in Birthday Suit over the Fenty Mademoiselle lipstick in the shade Thick. This was the last look. I hope you enjoyed my voiceover, and let's go ahead and get into my review.
What did you think of those looks? I tried to create a little bit of variety within the looks. I did use the brown and black to kind of make a smoky eye, and then added a pop of green on the lid just to show that if you are neutral but spreading out into color, you could do a neutral base or, you know, crease, and then just slowly but surely incorporate some color into your life. I actually can't speak on the longevity of these shadows because I didn't wear any of them for a full day just yet, so I will touch on that in future videos because this palette's not going anywhere, and I'm very excited to continue using it throughout the seasons. I think this is definitely a color story, just like the first palette, that can go throughout the seasons depending on how you pair the colors, etc. And of course, you can wear any color in any season. This is definitely no different than the first palette. The only shade that I had a tiny bit of trouble with was this one right here, which is D4, and that's upside down. That is D4 right there. That one I had a little trouble blending out on its own in the third look, but other than that, I had no problem blending out any of the shades in the palette. Little trick in case you didn't catch it in the looks, but when working with bright shadows like this, I highly recommend, where is my brush? Use this for an example. I highly recommend patting or pressing the shade into place first, and then go back and blend if you need to. In several looks, I didn't even feel the need to go back and blend because, I don't know, it practically blends itself, like I said with the first palette. If there's any cons to the palette, I would say the way that it is put together. I'm gonna put a picture up on the screen here, and I will put the person's name on the screen as well, but I did see a little mock-up over on Instagram of all three of the Norvina palettes that have come out so far, and kind of rearranged into a colorway that makes a little bit more sense for some people. You know, even for me, someone who's been doing kind of crazy colorful makeup for a couple of years now, I looked at this and my eyes kind of crossed and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. So I definitely had a much easier time today. Maybe my brain was a little clearer because the weather is warmer here today. But this was definitely one that I had to think a little bit harder than the first palette because it's just kind of discombobulated in the way that they're placed in the palette. But I think once you get used to it, you know, once you get your ball rolling, you'll not have any more trouble playing with the palette. If there's anything that makes this palette unique, I do think it is the variety. I think the first palette, you know, it was pretty true to the color story of like berries and purples and things like that. Whereas this has just a little bit of everything. You have yellow, you have blue, like I said, you have brown and black, you have pink, you have purple. Definitely have some beautiful like periwinkle blue shades in here, which is definitely something I lack in my collection. So I think the thing that is most unique about this particular palette is the variety and the versatility of this palette. I definitely think the first palette is versatile, but I think the variety in this palette is something that's special to the line so far. So before I tell you which shades were my favorites, I will tell you that I did not use shades B3 or B4 in a look. I do believe I used a little of B4 in my failed attempt at a blue and yellow look, so I do have a feel for the formula, and then I did use a little bit of B3 in my first impressions, but then it was darker than what I was anticipating, so I went in with a different shade. And then the other shade I didn't use at all is one of the duochromes, and it's this one right here, which is D1. As far as favorite shades go in this palette, I love this shade E2 right here. This is one of the duochrome shades. It has like a pink reflect with kind of like a taupey base, which is really pretty. I also really ended up loving this orange here. It's kind of a corally, like a pinky orange. That is D2 right here. I loved that shade in the third look. If I'm being honest, I didn't want to take the third look off to do a fourth look and then film the rest of the video, but I did. These favorite shades, I gotta say, unfortunately, the two yellow mattes in the palette I was not a huge fan of. I mean, but that's just me being picky. They're functional. I used them and they came out looking nice. They're just not my favorite in this palette. And then the last question I always like to answer when I'm reviewing a palette is, who would this palette be ideal for? I was thinking about this whilst beating my eyes to death and doing, well, what ended up being 6 total looks with this palette. And I think because of the variety of shades in this palette, I think this palette would be ideal for someone who is wanting to get into color. Not like dabbling in color or a pop of color, but like they're committed, they want to get into creating colorful looks. To me, when I look at this palette, I see a full painter's palette. Like if you were painting, this would be all the colors you would need, besides maybe a white, to come up with any variety of shades that you might want to create a bright and colorful look with. Other than that, I mean, of course, if you're already into color and you feel like this color story has a bunch of shades that you're lacking, I mean, I'm talking 5/6 of these shades should be shades that you would use for the price point, which is $60. But overall, I think this is a great palette. I don't know as if it beats out Volume 1 for me. I just love that palette. I've continued to use it and use it since I received it. And, you know, like I had said in my first impression with this palette, I do have Volume 3, so I'll be working with that palette next. And again, to remind you that Just because I'm reviewing these palettes, just because I'm bringing looks to you from these palettes, does not mean that I am in any way encouraging you to go out and purchase these palettes. These palettes are an investment, so if you do choose to purchase one or more of these palettes, I say you really look and study these palettes and figure out which color story is going to be the most useful to you, because at the price point, I think you really should predict that you're going to get a lot of use out of these. And for me, as a YouTuber who loves creating colorful looks, I mean, I feel like I just bought a bunch of new paints that I get to paint my face with. So those are my thoughts. I hope it's helpful if you're considering purchasing any of these. And if you're not planning on purchasing any of these, I hope I inspired you to dig into some bright and colorful eyeshadows in your own collection. And with all of that said, I hope all of your makeup days are absolutely totally 80s makeup days. And I will see you in my next video soon.